Good afternoon to all of you. Greetings from Central Bank Expertise of Central Bank of Sri Lanka. First of all, we warmly welcome all of you for this first expert panel discussion of the year 2022. Today we have this timely topic, which is achieving low carbon development targets in the power sector. Now, this being an area which has gathered a significant attention around the globe in the recent past, we, CBS, also thought to lead some discussion on this by bringing in different perspectives to one platform and share it with you. So we have invited Professor Priyantha Wijayatunga, Chief Energy Sector Group of Asian Development Bank, to deliver the keynote address today. We warmly welcome you, sir. And Professor Wijayatunga's speech will be followed by a panel discussion happening with the participation of experts representing different corners of the power sector. Now, today's panel consists of experienced personalities in this sector. Mr. Sulakshana Jayawardena, Director General of Sri Lanka Sustainable Energy Authority, and Mr. Rohan Seneviratne, Additional General Manager, Ceylon Electricity Board. And we have Mr. MJMN Marikkar, Chief Executive Officer of LTL Holdings, and also Dr. Tilak Simbalapitia, an expert and consultant in energy sector. This panel discussion will be moderated by Dr. Anil Pereira, Director of Economic Research Department of Central Bank of Sri Lanka. So we warmly welcome all of you for this seminar. So our viewers who are joining from different corners of the country and the world can interact with us and send your questions and thoughts on this through the Q&A option in Zoom. And if you are joining by Facebook, you can post your questions as a comment in the Facebook post as well. Now, without taking much time, let me now invite the Deputy Governor of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Mr. K.M.M. Siriwardena, to deliver opening remarks of the lecture and also to introduce Professor Wijayatunga to the audience. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Kushan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to deliver the opening remarks in this seminar or the panel discussion on achieving carbon development targets in the power sector, which I believe is fast becoming a pressing need for the sustainable development of our country. As you all know, energy is imperative for an economy, as it is a fundamental input for all economic activities, such as industrial production, transportation, and household consumption. Therefore, energy consumption has increased along with the growth in economies throughout the world, and most often leading to unsustainable energy usage practices. These practices not only result in a rapid depletion of energy sources, but also cause climate change through carbon emissions that can have detrimental effects on living beings as well as the environment. So actually, energy is the biggest contributor to climate change, accounting for around 60% of the total global greenhouse gas emissions. So having recognized the importance of reducing energy-related carbon emissions for sustainable development, the United Nations has identified affordable and clean energy as a core requirement for achieving sustainable development. So under the 7th Sustainable Development Goal, all UN member countries are committed to provide universal access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy sources and substantially increase the share of renewable energy in the energy mix by year 2030. Also, the countries have agreed to double the energy efficiency by 2030 while enhancing international cooperation for clean energy research and technology and investing in clean energy infrastructure. So with the aim of achieving SDGs, Sri Lanka also has made plans to achieve 70% of energy required by low carbon energy sources under its national policy framework of the government. So Sri Lanka is among the 43 countries that agree to make the electricity generation 100% renewable, thereby become a carbon neutral country by 2050. So in addition, Sri Lanka is also a signatory in the 2015 Paris Agreement for reducing carbon emissions to combat against climate change. Sri Lanka has already recognized that carbon-intensive economic growth is no longer a route for sustainable development and is gradually shifting towards more low-carbon energy sources. Since Sri Lanka is a net importer of petroleum products, the shift towards renewable energy sources is crucial to ease external sector pressure, especially in an environment where global petroleum prices are escalating. While developing Sri Lanka's hydropower generation through projects such as Umaya, Moragol, and Broadland projects, the government is also promoting other low-carbon energy sources such as solar and wind power. A development of Mana Wind Power Project, Surya Balasangrame concessionary loan scheme for rooftop solar power projects are some of such initiatives. Friendly foreign nations are also supporting Sri Lanka in this endeavor, and Sri Lanka's first floating solar plant was opened in Kilinochchi with Norwegian assistance. However, transitioning the power generation into the low-carbon energy sources will not be an easy path. Although Sri Lanka has been relying on hydropower as a renewable energy source, regular drought conditions that we have been experiencing in the recent past have made hydropower a less reliable energy source. So other low-carbon energy projects such as solar generally require higher upfront capital than the gas or coal power plants. This increases the difficulty of accessing affordable financing for non-renewable energy projects. But these low-carbon energy sources will not only enable us to reduce carbon emissions, but also will reduce Sri Lanka's expenditure on imported fossil fuels, allowing significant savings that can be delivered towards other development goals. It will also reduce Sri Lanka's vulnerability to external commodity price shocks, as the one that we are currently experiencing. Considering the massive investment needs, renewable power projects, financial system of the country has a major role to play in the low carbon development path of Sri Lanka. Therefore, our financial system also needs to be reformed to create incentives for the private sector to make investments in low carbon energy projects. If the financial institutions are giving due consideration to climate risk and social and environmental costs of energy projects, we can create incentives for the private sector to invest more in sustainable energy projects instead of high carbon emission projects. However, this financial system reforms will require action by all relevant stakeholders such as banks, institutional investors, securities market, rating agencies, regulatory bodies, as well as the central bank. In fact, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka joined the Sustainable Banking Network in 2016 with the aim of providing leadership for the process of greening the domestic financial system. The Central Bank developed the Sustainable Finance Roadmap in 2016 to guide Sri Lanka's sustainable financing journey. The bank is now in the process of developing a green financing taxonomy, which will provide the framework for investment analysis for the banking sector when funding for green projects. So this seminar is also one of the steps towards creating awareness among the policymakers and the general public on energy and low carbon development and the role of financial systems in promoting green energy projects. As the seminar proceeds, I am sure there will be a fruitful discussion to provide us all some valuable insights to make our journey towards sustainable development a success. To begin today's proceedings, we have the keynote speech, which will be delivered by Professor Priyantha Wijetunga, who is the Chief of Energy Sector Group, Asian Development Bank. If I give a kind of brief introduction about Professor Priyantha, he's currently the Chief of Energy Sector Group in the Sustainable Development Climate Change Department of the ADB. Priyantha has over 30 years of professional experience, including 14 years in ADB. He was the Director, South Asia Energy Division prior to assuming the current position in August 2021. Before joining ADB, he served as the Founder, Director General of the Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka and a Senior Professor of Electrical Engineering at the University of Moratuwa. Priyantha holds a doctorate in Power Systems Economics from the Imperial College of London, had been a regular academic visitor at Imperial College London during the period 1993-1998. He was the chairman of the South Asia Forum for Infrastructure Regulators, that is SAFIR, in 2016-7 and was also a member of the board of directors of the Sri Lankan Electricity Board and Sri Lanka Sustainable Energy Authority. He was an advisory board member of the Melbourne Energy Institute at the University of Melbourne during 2016-19. He is a chartered electrical engineer, a member of the Institute of Engineering Technology, that is IET UK, senior member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, and a fellow of the Institution of Engineers, Sri Lanka. He's a past president of the Sri Lanka Energy Managers Association as well. So with that brief introduction, I would like to now invite Professor Priyantha to make the keynote speech at this seminar. So over to you, Professor Priyantha. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rivardhana. It's very generous introduction of me. It's a bit embarrassing when I have all known people in the audience and who know who I am. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And thank you very much for very generous introduction. Let me quickly start sharing my screen. Now, as Mr. Srivardhana quite rightly explained, Sri Lanka has already committed to go for carbon neutrality by 2050. Now, what I would do during this 30 minutes or so in this presentation, I will take you through overall global context in terms of low carbon development or emphasis on net zero emissions, and how that translates into eventually the Asia Pacific region, and also how it's looked at by the financing institutions like Asian Development Bank when it comes to financing in the energy sector. So my outline of my presentation is I will quickly run through an introduction, and then what it would look like when it comes to low carbon energy pathway. And I'll give you a quick introduction to Asia Pacific region where we sit in and the developments in Asia Pacific region. Then, as I said, energy sector financing, and few final remarks and all my thoughts from my side. Now, energy sector decarbonization. As all of us know, this is very, very critical because eventually, if you have to address the challenges in climate change, we need to address issues in the energy sector. So energy sector decarbonization is a critical part of overall achieving overall carbon neutrality by, let's say, 2050 as expected by the world community. Because otherwise we will have issues in terms of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is what is the highest possible temperature rise which you can accommodate without much impact on the overall environment. Now, overall, more than 130 countries have already pledged to bring net zero emissions in their economy. This includes, PRC, People's Republic of China, and in fact, India is also working towards it. And this covers about 70% of the emissions, not all, and that's in a way that's great. And then to achieve, but as it stands now, these commitments are not good enough to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. That's the most interesting thing. That means we will end up with more than 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in global temperature by the end of the century. And as it stands now, some estimates say it can be as much as 2.1 degree or even about 3.5 degrees by 2100. And of course, my colleagues, all of them sitting here in the panel would agree with me that the path to path for net zero emissions is quite narrow. You will not have a wide window to work on if you are looking at net zero emissions, and requires large scale deployment of clean energy technologies. There is no argument about it. And this includes deployment of renewable energy, energy efficiency interventions, and electric vehicles in transport. So all these different sectors will have to be looked at, all of course energy eventually, but the window is quite narrow. And in fact, they consider it's almost like installing the world's largest solar park roughly every day. That's the enormity of the task. What it means, roughly these are estimates from International Energy Agency, which is quite, which has done quite elaborate modeling on this. And which means if you want to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, you need to have roughly about 4 trillion worth of investments by 2030 from now. And this means solar roughly about 600 odd gigawatts, and wind about 300 gigawatts. And as I said, it is almost like setting up of the largest solar park, which is 2.7 gigawatt Badla solar park in India, almost every day, which is of course not happening. All of us know it's not happening. But that's almost like setting up that kind of a park every day from now up to 2030. And also interestingly, they have estimated that electric vehicle sales, apparently it's about 5% of the total car sales or vehicle sales now. It will have to be about 60% by 2030. That's quite interesting. And the energy intensity in the economies will have to improve by about 4% every year annually. And they estimate the global economy will be 40% larger by 2030 compared to now, but will use less energy, and it should be 7% less than what we use now. So you see the enormity of the task associated with bringing net zero emissions by 2050. We all talk of difficulties and barriers and so on to overcome when it comes to deployment of clean energy technologies, achieving net zero emissions, but also we should definitely look at the benefits of low carbon growth. This entails obviously increase in clean energy investment, will end up giving millions of jobs. Of course, this includes not just jobs in the local communities in these countries, but also obviously communities outside, but overall it will create millions of jobs and significantly lift global economic growth, because this involves a lot of business activity, and that involves not just business activity at global corporate level, but also in local economies. Small systems in rural areas will develop economic activity in those areas. And also that will eventually achieve universal access to electricity, because that will encourage decentralized energies, and as a result rural and the poor will benefit enormously from that. Of course, if you take energy, not just power but clean cooking will obviously will expand worldwide by 2030. And the important thing is that it is estimated in this IEA modeling that most of the reductions in carbon dioxide emissions come through up to 2030 from technologies already commercially available. Right. By 2050, almost half the reduction comes from technologies currently available under half of that will have to be from technology which are still under demonstration and prototype phase. That means we need to really work on innovation. And this includes advanced batteries, things like hydrogen electrolyzers, and then direct air capture, and storage. And even institutions like ADB are working on these things, these new technologies, which are still at pilot stage. And major innovation efforts, therefore, will have to take place. And research and development is critical. Even commercialized technologies adoption needs research and development in countries like ours. So research and development is a critical part of this exercise. And people are at the center in all this. Multiple impacts on people's lives. As we discussed, transport, electric vehicles or vehicles with internal combustion engines. Heating, whether we use electric heating or heating with solar power, or are we going to use natural gas for heating. Cooking is the same story, and which involves people. Urban planning and jobs. Naturally, if you are talking about decarbonization, decommissioning all coal power plants, naturally that involves people. the jobs and urban planning. So roughly, International Energy Agency estimates about 30 million jobs can be created with these exercises, whereas about 5 million jobs will be lost because of reasons. And that's where what we call just transition comes in. You cannot just talk about an energy transition without talking about being just, because there are a lot of people who would be affected, and those have to be looked after. And the other interesting thing is that this modeling shows that the consumer choices lead to approximately 55% of the cumulative emission reductions. That means people's choices involve, like purchasing an electric vehicle. When you go and buy a vehicle, if it is an electric vehicle, that involves your choice. And these decisions will eventually lead to the possibility of net zero emissions. And in fact, interestingly, about 55% of the emissions depend on what you choose. Whether you choose an energy efficient technology when it comes to lighting or refrigeration or air conditioning, and your behavior. I mean, if you don't want to have, if you want to go somewhere which is just few meters away, you would rather walk rather than taking a car trip. And or you may cycle, or if you want, you can use public transport if public transport is available adequately. So these choices will eventually end up giving you 55% of the estimated reductions which we would like to have if you want to bring net zero emissions by 2050. And the most important thing is that we talk of energy in all, all sorts of energy subsectors. But in this scenario, what is most important is electricity. Electricity is at the core. So how you produce electricity is therefore very critical, because electricity will provide the end-use energy in most of these, economic activities. In that sense, the transport industries, commercial enterprises, houses, all these will eventually use electricity as end-use, source of energy, and which will be the case when it comes to net zero emissions by 2050. And electricity generation itself will have to reach by 2040 net zero emissions. That's interesting, if you want to achieve 2050 net zero emissions. And electricity is estimated to supply half of the total energy consumption compared to now. Now, I think it's in the range of about 15 to 20, I can't remember exactly the number. So half of the final energy consumption will have to be electricity in this scenario. So electricity plays a huge role. And which means if you're talking of bringing clean energy sources, and which are mostly intermittent, if you want to deal with this demand response, how people change their demand from time to time, and if you are looking at hydrogen-based fuels and so on, so all these require electricity system to be quite flexible. So transmission and distribution network, system flexibility improvements will have to come in, and to ensure reliable supplies. It is time for low carbon industries. We shouldn't just leave the industries out, because industries are a big consumer of energy, and new energy technology will take over gradually by 2045. And it's expected that mass majority of cars will run with electricity and fossil fuel cells, and planes to rely on advanced fuels and synthetic fuels. It's quite interesting. And industrial plants to use carbon capture or hydrogen. As you know, we have a huge coal power plant fleet in the world, and we need to have carbon capture. And also, when it comes to industrial plants like cement plants, a lot of carbon dioxide emissions, and you need to bring in technologies to capture this carbon and store, or use it in some form, so that the plants become carbon neutral. And therefore, achieving net zero emissions need a complete transformation of the energy system. You really have to have destruction and complete transformation. It's not gradual change in that sense. And largely renewables. When I say destruction, is not destruction per se, but you really need new thinking. It will be largely relying on renewables. And it's estimated that solar, of course, wind has already been playing a major role, but solar will be the single largest source of supply, naturally, because of the advancements in technology and also the ability to install faster and in a modular form. And this requires strong focus from all stakeholders. It's not just the utilities like electricity board or private investors like LTL projects, or in financing institutions like us, or the governments like the government of Sri Lanka. But it requires a strong focus from all stakeholders. Everybody has a role to play in it. You can't palm it off to one person and say, one institution and say that's it. And also, not only that, you need great international cooperation. I was just talking to, just before coming here in another gathering, where we are trying to garner support from various, donors to bring in grant support for various clean energy related activities. And international cooperation is very critical. I mean, the countries like Sri Lanka and much poorer countries in the region needs grant financing, low-cost financing to do a lot of things to bring in renewable energy or clean energy sources. And it's important to have this international cooperation. So future energy system would look like this. I don't have to reiterate this because most of the people in the audience can be are technical people. One important thing is that the future energy system will have a decreasing demand. So energy efficiency is critical. And at the same time, we have to decarbonize the system as much as possible. The existing plants will have to gradually, be transformed into clean energy systems. And to achieve this, naturally, digitization will have to come in, because we cannot do these things manually. You need the flexibility in the systems. The flexibility comes in how fast you can bring in what you need in the system. That means digitization by integrating information technology is very important. Decentralization, whether we like it or not, when it comes to renewable energy or clean energy sources, decentralization naturally comes. And because of various constraints you have, also the distribution nature of these technologies and the energy systems. So this is the kind of future energy system we are looking at. Let's look at the Asia Pacific region. Now we have a region, we are sitting in a region with about 4.5 billion people and 60% of the global population. And diverse geographies, you have geographies like Maldives, small island, and the Pacific Islands. At the same time, you have countries like China and India, who are big, energy consumers as well as big, populations. GDP, about 33% of the world GDP is sitting here in Asia Pacific region, and the growth rate is about 4.5% on average annually. And of course, it has gone down because of the pandemic, and it's picking up very fast now. And most interesting thing is it's quite vulnerable to climate change. Dependence on natural resources and agriculture sectors heavily. And as you know, when you have these natural, climate calamities, you will have issues with regard to these subsectors in the economy. And densely populated coastal area. If you look at Bangladesh, you have huge populations sitting in coastal areas. Any rise in, sea level will eventually affect millions of people. And the other difficult part is that, many of these countries have weak institutions. The governance is weak, and they don't have the strength, and they need the capacity, and they need the power to do this. And they are weak, and we need to support them. And significant level of poverty, it may not be seen as much in Sri Lanka, but if you look at Asia Pacific region as a region, you still see a lot of poverty in the region. And if you look at, in the meantime, the global emissions, how it has changed over the years in this region. I am talking about CO2 emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, because that's the one which is, being talked about now. You see the enormous change in global emissions in this region, sitting from only 13% of the global emissions in 1965. Now you're talking about 52% in Asia. And that's a huge jump. So that means we have to really carefully look at our energy systems in this region. And let's look at the power sector, how power sector is placed overall. And electricity generation in this region over the last 50 years has changed 16 times as against 1971 figures. And it's a 5-fold increase globally if you look compare that with the global situation. And at the moment, it's almost 50% of the global supply of 13 trillion units. You can see the huge movement in overall energy use in this region, and as a result, the need to focus on decarbonization and cleaning up the power sector. At the moment, as you can see, coal plays a huge role in this region, and this cannot be changed overnight, because closing down of a coal power plant involves a lot of other thinking, particularly on just transition, what is going to happen to the jobs and how we are going to replace this capacity and where is financing and all that. So it's very important to focus and very carefully how to decarbonize these sectors. Now, when it comes to international finance, let me talk about a little bit of ADB, because it's very similar in other institutions also. And we recognize the central role of energy. As I said, obviously you have to focus on power sector and energy sector if you want to decarbonize and achieve net zero emissions by 2050. There is no other way if you don't do that. And primary objective, of course, in places like ADB is focused on supplying electricity, supplying energy to needy populations in this region. But of course, we have to make sure it's clean and sustainable and reliable. Interestingly, you may not know, we have already committed full alignment with the Paris Agreement by 2023, our souring operations, and 2025, all non-souring operations. That means whatever we do in the energy, not only energy sector, but in all sectors, we have to be fully Paris aligned within next 2 to 3 years. That affects how we are going to finance, naturally. And now, recently we put out the energy policy, 2021 energy policy, which has 5 principles, out of which the first 2 principles are very, very critical. Of course, we focus on providing affordable, reliable supplies to our populations in the region. But at the same time, we need to really tackle climate change, environmental sustainability, and build a climate and disaster resilience in our energy infrastructure. That's our focus. Of course, then we have definitely institutional development and creating the investment environment for private sector participation, because private sector is quite critical to the development because of the enormous financial needs in the energy sector. And then regional cooperation is very important from the point of energy security, and also trading clean energy sources, and making sure that overall energy system in the region is low carbon. And then, of course, we have to combine all these knowledge, partnerships, finance, all these will have to be put together and to address the needs in the sector. And the most important thing I want to emphasize here is, from ADB energy policy viewpoint, we have already indicated that that we will not support upstream, midstream oil projects, and our intervention in oil projects, downstream oil projects, will be very, very limited. And no coal mining, processing, storage, transportation is in fact supported, and no new coal-fired generation for the first time, and we have declared that no coal-fired generation will be supported by ADB. And of course, we have not been financing nuclear energy, and that's not possible even now. That's obvious, because nuclear energy is not the suppliers of nuclear energy technologies are limited in the world, and therefore no point in getting multilateral development bank coming and supporting nuclear energy. And the other important thing, we will not support natural gas exploration or drilling activity or upstream gas related activities. The implications of energy policy overall, as I said, support for fossil fuels like oil, gas, only under very special circumstances, when it involves very specific reasons for energy access. And if there is nothing else to do, then of course it's supported. And then we will support decommissioning of coal-fired power plants. As you know, we have already announced this in COP26 as energy transition mechanism. That's quite an interesting mechanism, which will take itself another half an hour to explain how it works. It's quite nice, quite interesting. And then we will support renewable energy, energy efficiency, and transmission distribution network improvements. As I said, the flexibility is quite critical when it comes to transmission and distribution systems if you want to absorb more and more renewable energy. So which means increase in flexibility in power systems. And the innovative technologies. Obviously, we are not a research institution, but we would like to support some pilot projects in innovative technology so that eventually you will be able to replicate them in your systems. One good example is, in fact, you all know about the micro grid, pilot at University of Morocco, financed by ADB in collaborate, and Lanka Electricity Company collaborates in that. And the microgrid is a technology which we like to pilot so that eventually it can be expanded and replicated not only just India but in Sri Lanka but also in other countries. So we support that kind of interventions. Then we support natural gas as a transitional fuel under circumstances where there is no other option. I have indicated. And the business model, you can have different business models to bring in as much financing as possible to satisfy energy sector needs, because energy sector has enormous requirements. If anybody thinks that sovereign investments and the governments can support all requirements in the energy sector, that will never happen. That's basically a very inaccurate statement to make. We have huge requirements in the energy sector. We have to leverage private sector investments as much as possible. For that, we need to create a good investment environment to play and and we need to plan for low carbon development, and we need to support the governments for nationally determined contributions and increasing climate ambitions to achieve this task. What else? Of course, I don't want to go into details of it. We are supporting more adaptation related interventions also from ADB side. Few final remarks to conclude. Developing countries have minimal contribution to the past carbon dioxide. Everybody knows, everybody talks about why we have not contributed in the past, why we are the people who should be doing this, low carbon, going into low carbon path. But the important thing is that we are the people who suffer most. And the developing Asia is one of the geographic regions which really suffer from climate, disasters. And therefore, together we need to confront this challenge. It's not just farming it off to some countries and say, you have to solve it. No, we have to together do it. Therefore, as a developing member country and upper middle income country, we have our contribution to make. And we can contribute to the body of knowledge and to enlighten the policymakers and other stakeholders. And you all in the audience and in the panel will have to help to get this paradigm shift away from relying on status quo and learn from lessons around. And countries like ours need to leapfrog. Keep in mind, it shouldn't be the same path what all these developed countries have taken. You need not go through the path from hydropower to oil to coal to natural gas to clean energy. You don't have to go through that. Of course, we have gone through it to a certain extent, but we can leapfrog when it comes to technologies. And of course, institutions like ADB, if you approach it properly, if you tap the available resources, you can definitely get them to play a major role in this energy sector development. And as I said, financing will gradually shift away from traditional areas. These institutions, not just Asian Development Bank, but also the World Bank and all the others, will have already started shifting away from traditional areas of funding. And it will support innovative technologies, innovative approaches, whatever you come up with, and we are there to support. And as I said, sovereign financing, that means financing coming through the government, don't rely on that all the time. We are trying to use this financing to maximize leveraging private sector investments. Private sector will have to invest because there is no adequate investments coming from sovereign investments. Actually, institutions like ADB can bring in only a small drop of investments required in the Asia Pacific region compared to what is required. And at the same time, of course, we contribute to increasing knowledge contributions in this region and share experiences. We can help you to share what you experience in other countries or experience of other countries to be brought here. That's what we are trying to do through ADB interventions in various forms. We bring you to Maldives, we bring you to other places at the same time, we bring them here to share experience. This is what we can do as a financing institutions. So overall, I think I end my speech here to say that all of us will have to get together and help this transition. And Sri Lanka has already pledged to do certain things in terms of moving towards a low carbon path. which is paramount for economic development in this country from various viewpoints, including energy security in this country. You have already seen that here already. And so my message is, let's get together and contribute in this. And as I said, there is no one stakeholder who is responsible for this alone. And it's everybody will have to do their own job. With that, let me stop here. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Jayatunga, for that insightful as well as action-oriented presentation. Now, let's move towards the panel discussion. And as I said earlier, you can interact with us by posting your questions in the Q&A column of Zoom and as comments on the Facebook post. Now, to moderate this discussion, let me now invite Dr. Anil Pereira, Director of Economic Research Department of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, to moderate the session. Dr. Anil, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Kushan. Am I audible?
Yes, very well.
Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. And first, I would like to thank Mr. Mahinda Siriwardana, Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, and Professor Priyantha Wijetunga from ADB for setting the stage for this discussion. So before I move to the panel discussion, I also thought making some, remarks as a preamble to the panel discussion. And I think from the Deputy Governor's address, we all understand energy is one of the most important inputs for economic development of any country. And in the case of countries like us, Sri Lanka, I think the growing demand for energy and energy consumption is very apparent in a developed emerging country. And at the same time, what we have realized from Professor Priyantha's presentation, I think the power sector must be at the center of any global climate change solution, and adoption of low carbon technologies and even decarbonization is require some substantial change in the economic parameters as well as the behavior and the thinking of the overall stakeholders of the economy. And what we have seen, I think, as one of the climate vulnerable forum member countries, Sri Lanka is also affected disproportionately by the climate change. And if I go back to this 22nd climate conference in Marrakesh, held in Morocco in 2016, I think most of the countries there, they committed to survive and thrive towards kind of a greener economies by achieving 100% renewable energy generation by 2050. And Sri Lanka, as one of the member countries of this forum, also pledged that we will thrive towards achieving this renewable energy target by 2050. And also based on the Sustainable Development Goals and that agenda, Sri Lanka has basically placed its development agenda in line with these global agreements. But at the same time, as Professor Priyantha very clearly articulated, a lot of opportunities as well as challenges remain, especially I think this 1.5 degrees target by 2050 is a questionable one. And even it could reach 2 Celsius degree by 2100. So there are a lot of challenges remain. So I think this panel discussion, expert panel discussion, will be able to help shed some light on these aspects. And actually, for that matter, being guided by Professor Priyantha's presentation, we have very eminent panel here to discuss these aspects. So first, let me introduce the panel members. We have Mr. Sulakshana Jayawardena. He is the Director General of Sri Lanka Sustainable Energy Authority. And also he serves as the Director Development of Ministry of Power and Energy. And he has been contributing very actively in terms of participating in a number of working groups, steering committees, presidential task forces in renewable energy and energy management. He holds a bachelor's degree in science from University of Peradeniya and a master's degree from the University of Colombo. We also have welcome Mr. Sulakan, and also we have Mr. Rohan Seneviratne. Mrs. Rohan Seneviratne serves as the additional General Manager of the Ceylon Electricity Board, CEB, and also functions as the Executive Director of the flagship project monitoring unit of the Presidential Secretariat. He's a chartered electrical engineer with over 30 years of experience in the fields of engineering and technology, and also a fellow member of the Institute of Engineering and Technology, UK, and Institution of Engineers, Sri Lanka, and a member of Engineers, Australia. He's an alumni of University of Moratuwa and has obtained his master's from University of Colombo. Welcome, Mr. Rohan. And also we have engineer Mr. Marika. He is the CEO of LTL Holding Group, an engineering company operating in Sri Lanka and overseas, involving especially in IPP ventures. And he has overall experience over 30 years and in development of independent power generation projects and operations, execution, project management, transmissions, etc. He's a chartered electrical engineer and a corporate member of Institute of Engineers Sri Lanka and Institute of Electrical Engineers UK. Mr. Marika possesses a BSc Engineering degree of University of Peradeniya, an MSc in Project Management from University of Moratuwa, postgraduate diploma in Industrial Engineering from NIBA. Welcome, Mr. Marika. And last but not least, well-known Mr. Tilak Simbalapitiya. He's an energy consultant. He earned his PhD in electric power engineering from University of Cambridge in 1988. For 10 years, he worked at the Ministry of Power and Energy and at electric utilities in Sri Lanka and abroad. Presently, he works as an energy consultant, as I mentioned. He's a visiting lecturer in several universities in Sri Lanka. So I think with these, welcome Dr. Simbalapitiya. And with these credentials, you can understand the depth of the discussion that we can have going forward. So moving to the panel discussion, first we will have some opening remarks by the panel members, and thereafter we can take some structured questions as well as some open questions from the audience. Let me move to Mr. Sulakshan Javadhan first, because I think we cannot forget the government in any endeavor, being the main economic policy maker. So I think from the discussions that we had already, we understand how the government policy and the policy direction will have some impact on the overall direction. Now, we understand, Mr. Sulakshan, Sri Lankan government, successive governments have taken this sustainability and climate issue and the targets, energy in the energy sector, especially low carbon targets, are very vital. And we have seen even in the present government that has been taken into the policy documents, and the government is basically driving towards a direction. Now, can you elaborate us on the government's clean energy target going forward? Because we understand, if I read some ADB papers, I can see the clear policy signals, coordination and communication are really important in terms of achieving these targets. So over to you, Mr. Sulakshan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anil, and I would like to thank Center for Banking Studies and Central Bank of Sri Lanka for organizing this timely event and bring the aspects of government, private sector, then experts and utilities in terms of achieving low carbon development targets in Sri Lanka. So having said that, I would like to jump to the question or I try to elaborate the government policy targets in terms of achieving low carbon generation. So as you very correctly mentioned that even previous governments, they focused renewable energy development and in terms of achieving sustainability and also energy security within the country, and also bring the electricity sector generation into low carbon emissions. So if you consider about the national energy policy, which was introduced in 2009, and there was a target to achieve 10% of renewable energy generation by 2015, and also subsequently it was changed to achieve 20% of non-conventional renewable energy by 2020. So there were several targets. Some of them we were able to achieve and some of them not. But now we have focused to achieve 70% of energy demand or the electricity demand by 2030 from renewable energy sources. If you consider about the efforts or the initiatives that we introduced to achieve this policy target, this was declared with the achieve the president's policy of vistas of prosperity and splendor. Under that, this target was announced, and now we are working on it with the collaboration and with the assistance from various stakeholders, as Dr. Priyantha Wijetunga mentioned about the requirement of stakeholder engagement with this policy target. So we are working with stakeholders to achieve this policy target. And this is sort of policy target, and based on that, CB has prepared their long-term generation expansion plan, because that is one of the key requirement to achieve this kind of target, because CB is the utility where or the which can purchase electricity and absorb renewable energy to the system, because our network has been expanded all over the country. So with that aspect, now we are working on getting renewable energy into the system. In that context, we have focused several strategies, because this cannot be done only with the foreign investments, government investments. We have to focus private sector investment. It is very interesting to see most of the participants from banking sector. So one of the key stakeholders is the bankers, and because we need investments for the energy sector in terms of electricity generation, not only the generation, to put up transmission facilities, infrastructure facilities to facilitate renewable energy generation, because we need timely investments to achieve this policy targets. According to CB plan, they have targeted to get at least 3,279 megawatt of solar project, solar generation, or the solar capacities by 2030 to achieve this target, and also wind, 1,320 megawatt of wind capacity by 2030. Likewise, each and every year we have focused to add the capacities to achieve this policy target. So when it comes to the strategies or the implementation level, we need several strategies to implement or achieve this policy target. So one of the key thing that we have focused is, because renewable energy projects you have to implement where the potential is there. So to achieve that target, we have initiated expression of interest process in last year, and we received quite a significant number of expression of interest from the various stakeholders, local and foreign investors. So now we are focusing to get a large-scale project through that process based on the CB long-term generation expansion plan identified capacity, and also medium scale and small scale, and also solar rooftop systems. I saw that some of the questions were there in the question and answer box. They have raised the question about the financing for solar rooftop program. So that is also imperative requirement, low concession or concessional financing for solar rooftop systems. And that kind of initiatives we need to facilitate customers to have solar rooftop systems on top of their roofs. And when it comes to the medium scale and small scale projects, now the government very recently has approved some provisions to Sri Lanka Electricity Act, and it is being processed to get the table in the parliament to get the parliamentary approval to introduce into the existing or the prevailing legal system. So there are certain policy initiatives, policy targets to achieve 2030 policy target, and also to achieve 2050 carbon neutrality. When I listen this Professor Priyanta's keynote speech, according to him, we have to achieve it by 2040, though we targeted to achieve 2050. So let's see the possibilities to have that policy target. Maybe government will advance it, considering the context and also the policy achievement. I mean, if we can achieve the 2030 target by 2030 or before that, then we will be able to advance the carbon neutrality of the energy sector, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years. It depends on our achievement in terms of present policies or the present policy targets. So having said that, I would like to conclude my opening remarks because time constraints. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sulakshana. I think very clear on the government policy direction and the targets and the plans to achieve such targets. I think you have given a very good elaboration on that. Now, I think in Professor Priyanta's speech, we realized that in this whole game, electricity is at core, and which needs to reach zero net emissions by 2040. Now, in that regard, we know in Sri Lanka, in terms of electricity generation, Ceylon Electricity Board, CEB, so-called CEB in short, plays an important role. And Mr. Rohan, we are aware in Sri Lanka, I think up until mid-90s, the electricity demand was entirely met by 100% met by hydropower. After that, we had some, change in the mix of electricity generation into thermal resources alongside the renewable energy sources that we are talking right now. Now, in terms of CEB's role, and how do you position its role in this entire exercise? Now, we understand, as Mr. Sulakshana also mentioned, CEB has devised a long-term generation expansion plan, right, which we call as LTGEP. So where you also place renewable energy into the formula. And the government has very clearly identified this renewable energy project as a matter of policy priority in diversifying electricity generation in Sri Lanka. So can you elaborate us on the CEB's role in this entire exercise?
Thank you, Dr. Anil Pereira. And first of all, let me extend my sincere appreciation to the Center for Banking Studies for organizing this webinar on very important subject on the achieving low carbon development targets in the power sector. And also I wish to extend my sincere thanks to the organizers for inviting me as a panelist for this important discussion. As Dr. Anil Pereira said, I will try to focus on the role of CEB in achieving low carbon development targets in the power sector in my 10 minutes of small introduction in the first round. As all of you are aware, the policy of the government of Sri Lanka at present is to generate 70% of electrical energy country in the year 2030 using renewable sources. This policy directive has been properly conveyed to CEB in the early 2022. So when we look at this policy target of 70%, what I think and what I believe is not only CEB can achieve this target. So there are so many other institutions that we have to work together in integration to achieve this target. If I may mention a few of these organizations, of course, CEB will play a key role. Sustainable Energy Authority, Ministry of Power, Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka, the Treasury, the Land Ministry, the entrepreneurs, and the general public, all will have to work together on an integrated and designed plan to achieve this target. Also, I believe that this is a huge program, and in order to see this program is moving proper, I believe that there has to be a secretariat at the level of presidential secretariat to monitor, review, and facilitate and to do the interagency coordination to achieve this very ambitious target. Now, let me come to the role of CEB in achieving this 70% target. First of all, CEB has to prepare plans. As Dr. Anil said, the least cost long-term generation plan. Now we have to revisit it and to do it for the new government policy, that is 70% renewable energy by 2030. Once you do this plan, you have to do the renewable integration study as well. So once you do the renewable integration study, so you have to fine-tune your least cost generation plan to suit for the integrity problems. Because as we all are aware, the maintaining the grid, maintaining the stability of the grid in accommodating large quantities of renewable energy is a very important fact. That is why CEB engineers do this renewable integration study plan. And after that, the CEB has to do the transmission development plan as well as the distribution development plan. When CEB is doing these plans, CEB has to take into consideration the energy security, sustainability, and the economics of power generation. So CEB's first main task is to prepare these plans to suit for the government's new policy agenda of 70% of electrical power generation from renewable sources by the year 2030. CEB engineers have started this work, and it takes few months of time because these are complex processes and complex programs. So CEB engineers are working on this. At the same time, CEB engineers quickly developed the capacity additions that are required to achieve this 70% target. If I just elaborate that, from this year onwards up to 2030, we have to add 5,000 megawatts of renewable power to achieve this target. So how this 5,000 megawatts come? From wind, another 1,245 megawatts should add to the system. Now we have only 248. From solar, another 3,204 megawatts should add to the system. Now we have 510. Biomass, another 134. Mini hydro, another 150. And the major hydro, another 190. So in total, we have to add about 5,000 megawatts of renewable energy during next 9 years. That means each year we have to add about approximately 550 megawatts per year. And if you take only the wind, we have to add about 140 megawatts of wind power plants each year. If you take only the solar, we have to add about 350 megawatts of solar power plants each year to reach this target. So this target has to be achieved through private-public participation. Most of these power plants should be built by the private sector. So the total investment that is required to put up these power plants is about $4,000 million US. That is $4 billion US. So that is for the power generation to reach this 70% target. Now, in order to accommodate these large quantities of renewable power, we have to improve the transmission and distribution network, because that is a very challenging task. We have to maintain the system stability, and at the same time, we have to bring those renewable energy which are generated in different places to the load centers. So in order to do that, we have to develop our transmission network. We have to construct new 400 kVA transmission lines, and to upgrade the existing transmission lines, we have to install new equipments to maintain the system stability. And also we should convert this transmission grid to a smart grid. So that is an enormous task before all of us, and that requires about $1,800 million US for the next 9 years. So in addition to the development of the transmission network, in order to cater for these additional large quantities of renewable energy, we have to put up battery storage and pump storage. So the battery storage investment will be about $1,500 million for the next 9 years. And the pump storage investment will be about $780 million. So altogether, transmission and the associated developments require about $4,000 million for the next 9 years. So the seeking for finances and also constructing of new transmission lines, constructing and getting these transmission lines upgraded to smart grid features and so on is another very important task that the CEB should embark on. At the same time, distribution network has also to be improved, and this has to be converted to a smart grid. So advanced distribution management systems to be included, like smart metering systems and SCADA control centers and so on, to absorb large quantities of renewable energy. So therefore, we have to invest money on the distribution sector as well to bring these new technologies like smart metering and smart grid. So that is also a prime task of CEB when we achieve this 70% scenario. And at the same time, rooftop solar will play a huge role in this equation. Now, the last year we absorbed 84 megawatts of roof solar in the system, and this year we need to absorb at least 100 megawatts. After that, each and every year we should absorb at least 100 megawatts of roof solar for the system. Now, in order to absorb roof solar, we have to develop our distribution network. So that's also a huge role to play by the CEB, and also the business models have to be run by the CEB in roof solar. So there is a huge component to be done by the CEB. Then the interconnection of large renewables and the interconnection of renewable power plants with the existing networks is also a task, important task to be done by the CEB. And when we absorb large quantities of large power plants, so we have to have a process to follow, mostly the tender process, the competition has to follow. Then the development of the RFP documents and inviting bids for large renewable power plants has to be done by the CEB. So that is also a large task assigned for the CEB. And then the signing of power purchase agreements and managing power purchase agreements. Those are also very important, and those are also mainly to be done by the CEB. And we have to go for demand response schemes. So when we go for large renewable resources, definitely we have to go for demand response schemes. So we have to develop new demand response schemes and to implement. And also at the same time, as very correctly said by Professor Wijetunga, the digitalization of CEB is also a must to achieve these large quantities of renewable energy. So there we have to go for advanced distribution management systems and various other ERP systems and so on. So CEB has to play a huge role. On top of all these, CEB has to be viable, financially viable to do this exercise. Because if CEB is not financially viable, how can CEB pay for the renewable power generators? So if we don't pay the renewable power generators in time, they lose the confidence. So then they will not invest money in this sector. So therefore, the prime target, one of the prime target is to make CEB financially viable. Then only we can absorb large quantities of renewable energy. So to do that, we have to reduce our generation cost, and at the same time, we have to fine tune our tariffs. So that is also a very important area we have to go on. So when we look at next couple of years, so where we are, so this year will be a very good year for the renewable integration in CEB. So we are going to add about 415 megawatts of large hydro, mini hydro, solar and wind during this year. So that's substantial number. But next year it will be 254 megawatts, and the following year is 300 megawatts and so on. Those are all committed projects. But this is not sufficient. In order to go for 70% targets, we have to add at least 500 megawatts of renewable power plants to the grid every year. So these committed power plants are not required. So we have to go for new methodologies and to get large quantities of renewable energy absorbed to the system. So in summary, CEB has to play a huge role, very, very important role to achieve this 70% target. But CEB itself cannot do this exercise. As I said before, many other stakeholders have to work together. And also we have to prepare a very solid integrated plan so that each and every player will know what their role is to be. Now there is confusion in each and every player's role. So we have to prepare this integrated plan, the approach, and to identify the roles of each and every person and the role of the CEB also to achieve this target. As I said before, this we have to have a proper secretariat to monitor and to drive this process like Mahaweli program. So this is more than, this is bigger than the Mahaweli program, because this is $8 billion investments that we are going to get. So it is not easy to get such large investments to the sector. 4 billion for the power generation and another 4 billion for the transmission and distribution network improvement. So there is an enormous amount of work to be done. So therefore, definitely the top blessings and a secretariat like Mahaweli project driven, everybody, even every citizen has to be a party to this program, because otherwise this 70% target cannot be achieved. So I think, so what we have to do is we all stakeholders have to get together and work toward this target, because this is the government target. This is a very good target, very challenging target, but I think all stakeholders, everybody, if we get together and work on a prepared, very, very elaborated plan, I think we can achieve this target by 2030. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Seneviratne, for your opening remarks by setting the kind of a tone for this discussion in terms of CEB's role. And as we understand, this 70% target by 2030 cannot be achieved if we don't initiate any projects right now. I think, as you have very clearly outlined, a lot of initiatives are there, and we also understand certain projects like Umawaya, Broadland, Surya Bala Sangrami, and also these Siambalando project, Punarin project. I think a lot of initiatives are going on. And also you highlighted on this financial viability of the CEB, I think a very hot topic. If I want to focus from the central bank's perspective, that is a very important and very timely topic. I'm sure we will have some time to discuss going forward. I think it's very clear that you have clearly articulated on the plans of the CEB. Now, it's really important that we should have the role of the private sector in place to achieve these targets. Now, I think from Professor Priyanta's presentation, we realize an enormous amount of money is needed, something like $4 trillion investment. And also I read an UNCTAD article saying annually, probably there would be a need for funds of around 515 billion invested in clean energy projects. Now, having said that, I think we have Mr. Marika representing the private sector here as the CEO of LTL Holding. How do you look at the role of the private sector in this entire exercise, Mr. Marika? I think it's really important. I think being the engine of the growth, private sector has to play a catalyst role. So is it the same for this energy sector? What do you think?
Okay, thank you very much for actually giving me the opportunity to participate on this very important topic. Also for Mr. Rohan Seneviratne, Professor Vijay talked about the seriousness of the climate and how much we have to be concentrate on. And Mr. Rohan Seneviratne talked about the complexity of getting renewable energy into the systems, how technically it is complex. And having listened to that, what we feel is as private sector, we have more and more important role now. Because as we know that private sector is always looking for opportunities, business opportunities, and also to be part of the development. And the situation like what we are facing in Sri Lanka, where the public finance has been constrained and scarce, so the role of the private sector comes into more effective, and the need of the private sector is very essential now. With regard to the renewable energies or the contribution what private sector has done so far in Sri Lanka. Out of the all installed renewable energy, approximately 1,200 megawatt has been developed by private sector, which amounts to approximately already $1.8 billion of investment, which has gone so far over last 10 to 15 years. For the last 5 years, actually, major part of that is the last 5 to 10 years. So it has been a quite substantial contribution already made, and apparently the CEB has also contributed to develop their distribution and the transmission systems. So that is on the renewable side, and on the low carbon side also the LNG power plant, which definitely better than the coal or oil power plant in respect of environmental. And on LNG side, there are 2 power plants. One is on operating, but it's not operating on oil now, but it's commissioned or it's ready for LNG operation. And another one is under construction, and another power plant on the LNG is on the way. So when we see by 2025, we assume like there will be about 1,000 megawatt LNG fired power plants in Sri Lanka, which will help to bring these low carbon development targets of Sri Lanka. And in all, in that way, private sector has been already heavily involved. All these LNG projects are developed by private sector. So when I say like taking all this into account, already about $3 billion of investment has been done by the private sector. But this is not enough. As Mr. Srinivasan said, we are going to add another 1,200 megawatt of wind and about 3,000 megawatt of solar to achieve 70% renewables by 2030. And whether the private sector has appetite to do that, yes, I think they have very much appetite on that. In the recently concluded expression of interest program, there were about 600 applications, which totals about 34,000 megawatts. And let we assume like minimum of 10% of them are serious, because we know always there are applications, but out of all that, even if you take the 10% serious applications, we are talking about 4,000 to 5,000 megawatt serious players. So they are there. What do we, the private sector, look when we are trying to contribute in this development? Obviously, we need bankable projects. Why private sector naturally look for profits? That we cannot take it away. That is the part of the business. So private sector needs profits, and therefore these projects should, or this tariff should contribute to the returns as well as the risk taken by the private sector to compensate any eventualities. So on that, apart from the financial profits, the companies like to get the social recognitions on the support of the green environment or the green growth, or even to get see the opportunities of using the cheaper available finances for renewable energy to get into a new markets or expand their businesses. All those kind of things are the secondary benefits what we look in. And in a role wise, other than I think most of the time we spoke about the investor role. Other than that, there are quite a number of private sector parties looking to act or as a contribute as a EPC contractors and the OEM suppliers of equipment and the other local suppliers to develop. With all of them are important in the developing the project. And we also can't forget there are players like in the private sector, the facilitators, they are in the form of local agents, and they sometimes they're lobbyists, sometimes they are deal makers, sometimes they are deal breakers. They do also play a very key role in all these target achievements. So that is very much common we see nowadays. And on the point of, as Mr. Rohan Saniratna gave the numbers, my numbers are so very close of generation facilities for about 1,200 wind and 3,000 megawatt of solar, and few hundreds of biomass need about close upon to $5 billion. And transmission system improvement, CB might need about $2.5 to $3 billion. And with the possible, these projects come in certain time periods. So with all the price escalations and other market conditions, what we see is approximately $800 to $1 billion investment has to go into the sector if we are going to achieve this by 2030. The problem, and out of that, about 70 to 80% will be the foreign component part for the equipment and the material. So whether our finance market or banks can support it, definitely I think it is not, because if you say one of the reports says, our major 5 private sector banks, their net worth is about 25 billion, and at that kind of level, that annually to support about 1 to 2 billion is absolutely not possible. So we need international and the big investors to come in, and we need international financing. International financings are available for RE, as Professor Vijay said. They are not anymore available for oil or coal, and we are personally experiencing that. Future even maybe the future LNG projects are also challenged, and so the funds are available only on renewable sector. For that, we need to invite international players. Then what is most importantly is we like to see CEB's balance sheet is in a very healthy condition. So unfortunately, we have been experiencing delays of 6 to 9 months, sometime even 1 year delays on payment for IPPs, which is very discouraging. And the reason for that is CEB selling price is not enough. That is the fact. And I think as a first step, from the private sector's perspective, what we feel is like as soon as possible, we should have CEB should bring their tariff to at least to reflect the cost of their generation and the transmission and the distribution part. Not even the major profits, but at least the cost reflective tariff should be there. So then we need the CEBs in a good healthy conditions, which will give a real appetite for the foreign capital investors. And also what from the sector to achieve all these things, what we need is the consistent policies. Sometimes we have seen like IPPs are not considered, and for some period then IPPs are considered, and some period we say okay, some kind of technology is not okay, and then that is revised. So I guess like at a very high level, some stable policy, the consistency in the policy should be required, because that is also seen not only by the investors, even by the lenders. They also look into that. And in the local banks support, we know that local banks are willing to support, and they need experience when financing the bigger project. When we are basically experiencing personally, like in our companies, when we go for a bigger investment or bigger project financing, we sometimes see lack of finance in the banking, lack of experience in the banking sector. We don't find anything wrong in that, because if you really see, the last major project finance project happened in this country in 2007. So for 15 years, there's a big gap of bigger project, which about in the matter of $100 million or more worth power project not being financed by the private sector for last 15 years. So the banks also have not been given the not exposed or given opportunity on that basis. So we need these local banks to work with the foreign banks in a syndication to support, at least to give the confidence for the foreign bank also to support us. For that, again, the problem is whether the local banks can come with dollars in lending, and there is a issue, and we all know what is the present situation. So all these things contribute sometimes negatively, but the sector is looking some positive approach from the government will come in, as because this is one of the major projects going to be taken up, and as Mr. Rohan said, it can be easily put much bigger than the Mahavali project, because it's a huge involvement in all parties, and also from the CEB side, the interconnection facilities, that is the one that every year, I mean, the private sector like to put money today and make profit tomorrow. That's a fact. So wait for interconnection facilities to come. So CEB also should parallel start to develop that facility, so that when the plants are ready or the investment, because whatever it is, if you go for a bigger project, if the proper international connection facility is not there, and 100% sure the banks will not finance. International banks will never finance on that. So that even that may be a very small part of the entire project, right? We are talking about the two bays of 130 kV. This thing is fairly very small compared to the entire project, but that should be there. And in the CEB's process of procurement, there could be some delays. So maybe if there is a possibility, if the CEB can consider that the transmission part of this interconnection transmission facility developed by the developer along with their project, and taken over by CEB and can build on the CEB specification, that might help. That might help. So these are the few thoughts that I would say, like sector is ready, sector has appetite, sector has invested now and willing to invest, and we need that kind of a policy and the overall support from the authorities. So
Thank you.
That's the short I would say, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parikkar. I think it's very comprehensive, and we are very clear on the readiness of the private sector. Obviously, it's $1 billion investment, and you cannot expect, investing private sector without having a reasonable return. So I think it's very clear. And I think from the central bank perspective, I would also like to, mention here, as Deputy Governor also mentioned, the local banks are also having the appetite in terms of investing in sustainable solutions. I think right now the banking sector is providing some finance. Obviously, it may not be sufficient, but going forward with the introduction of the sustainable finance taxonomy also, I think there will be increased participation of the local banks. Last but not least, but I think it's very important that we seek the independent views of the energy experts. Now we have Dr. Siamala Pittiya with us. And it's very obvious, I think, the next 20 to 30 years, Dr. Siamala Pittiya will be very important in terms of transformation, reformation. A lot of things are underway in terms of the energy sector's future. At the same time, we are looking at some regulatory reforms. We are talking about large-scale investments. And also we are talking about technological innovations, research and developments, internationalization, a lot of things are there. So what is your opinion as an independent energy consultant on the I mean, in terms of energy planners' perspective, especially focusing on the financial health of the sector as well. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you very much. I will make it very brief because I see there are a large number of questions, so we should give more time to their questions than to our views. But very briefly, let me remind our audience that Sri Lanka is a low energy intensive country. Our per capita electricity consumption is 700 kilowatt hours per person per year. Top of the range is Norway at 27,000. 27,000 against Sri Lanka's 700 kilowatt hours per person per year. I'm not saying Norway is bad, but what I say is that Sri Lanka should expect a higher consumption requirement of electricity, even under a business as usual scenario. Considering the simple facts that even India is at 1,100 kilowatt hours per person per year right now. Malaysia is at 5,000. So you know the range. Sri Lankan uses just above 12% of what a Malaysian uses today. So therefore, electricity consumption will increase and we will have to prepare for that. Considering clean energy targets or renewable energy targets, I wish we also defined our targets in terms of capacity like the Indians do. They are adamant that they should state their capacity in terms of megawatt rather than kilowatt hours. Sri Lanka has been honestly using kilowatt hour as our measure to indicate the share of renewable energy in the grid. So today, I would say 2020, that's a year for which data is already published. Sri Lanka was 37% renewable in electricity generation in terms of energy. But Sri Lanka was 48% renewable in terms of capacity of renewable energy for power generation. So I'm just throwing some light into the numbers that are important. I'm also very concerned about the very large capacities of renewables that will have to be transported over long distances. Do not forget that the fleet of fossil power plants run at about 80% of the time, particularly the cheaper ones. So the capacity factor is 80%. Whereas for solar PV, the capacity factor is 17%. So to get a kilowatt hour from a conventional power plant versus a solar PV system, you need to have approximately 4.5 times of capacity in terms of megawatt. And if that resource is far away, it has to be transported to the load center. And that needs transmission lines. So I share the concerns of Mr. Marikar and Mr. Senaviratne that there has to be a vigorous or more organized structure, particularly to get the land matters resolved, as well as the transmission right-of-way matters resolved. Because we are thinking of a project over the next 10 years, whether it is 60, 70 or 80, the numbers are very similar, which needs a very large amount of land and a very large number of transmission lines, even if we incorporate battery storage into new renewable energy parks. Still, we have to accept the fact that the resource is not in the area where people live or the industries operate or the businesses operate. So therefore, these are some of my thoughts. I have to say a lot of things, but just a quick response to your very last point. I do share the fact that everybody in the electricity industry should be equal partners. In the same way that a customer wants to get a solar PV connection should be treated fairly. And if it cannot be connected, he should be explained as to why it cannot be connected and what has to be done to upgrade the network, he should know. But in the same way, CEB should not be pushed to purchase electricity at prices way above what it could afford. Or on the other hand, keeping CEB as a loss-making organization continuously for 11 years now, and this is the 12th year, I'm sure cannot contribute to the degree of confidence that we want to inculcate to get the private sector in to invest on renewable energy. So I will stop there. with the note that all stakeholders should be equal, and it is the job of the Public Utilities Commission to make sure that equality is practiced. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. I think making very brief and very, I think, important remarks. Now, let me take some questions from the audience as well as some structured questions for the benefit of our audience. Now, I'll start with Mr. Sulakshana Javadana. Now, I think since we have some, I'm very sure private sector people and investors are joining this forum. So can you be, I mean, specifically tell us in a very, I think in 2 minutes maybe, what is the facilitation process to ensure that renewable energy projects are implemented in a successful manner in this country? Can you brief on that aspect, please?
Thank you, Dr. Anil, for raising that question. Unfortunately, I have some issue with my video camera. So without switch on the video camera, I will talk on the matter. So yeah, in fact, one of the key requirement of the project is getting land and also getting approvals before the implementation of the project, because that is the time consuming matter. I mean, getting lands and also getting approval. So in that context, as a sustainable energy authority, we are planning to provide lands, especially the identified large scale projects like Siamalando project, Mana project, Punarin project. We are working on to get the lands and to hand over the lands to the developer to implement the project. And also approval process. When it comes to the approvals, it is very hectic process for the developers or the investors. So we very recently, the minister or state minister of the solar, wind and hydropower generation projects development has gazetted the guideline to apply for renewable energy development process. So in that context, we try to work as because that is the one of the key requirement of Sri Lanka Sustainable Energy Initiative to provide approvals, relevant or required approvals for the renewable energy projects to implement the project timely. So these are the two key areas where we have focused and to provide facilitations for the developers. Not only that, we are planning to have some online systems, because then anybody can monitor the process, getting approval and how long and which organization that the application held up, and sort of reviewing process can be done with this with the introduction of this facility or the online system. And also as a government, the government has provided some tax exemptions for the relevant materials, relevant equipments need for the implementation of renewable energy projects. In nutshell, those are the key areas where we have focused and where we are going, and we are providing facilities for the investors to encourage them to work with renewable energy development.
Thank you, Mr. Sulakshana. May I turn to Mr. Rohan Seneviratne? I think you spoke about some of the projects that are in place. Can you, I mean, give us some more information on the projects that are in the pipeline? Now, for example, I hear from Mr. Marika, there are like 35,000 megawatt generation plans from the renewable projects applications. So what is the exact pipeline that we have, and also maybe you can elaborate on the financial viability of the CEB as well. I think that's one of the important factor for the entire country. Over to you, Mr. Seneviratne.
Yeah, firstly, the renewable projects that are in pipeline, perhaps I can tell what is in pipeline for this year. This year, the Broadlands will be commissioned about 35 megawatts, and the Maui will be commissioned about 120 megawatts. Both will be major hydro. And then there are 15 megawatts of mini hydro power plants are in line for this year. So these are about nearing completion. And the roof solar, our target for this year is 100 megawatt, because last year we achieved 85 megawatt. So this year we want to achieve 100 megawatt from roof solar. And wind, there will be 2 into 10 will be commissioned this year, that is 20 megawatt, and biomass 15. And so many ground solar projects are going on, that is 1 to 10 megawatt and 75 kilowatt and so on. So from the ground solar, we can get about 110 megawatts this year. So when you add all these things together, 2022, we can get about 415 megawatts of renewable. So that's sizable, I think, because our day demand is only about 2,100. So 415 getting on board this year is, I think, pretty good. I think this is the large number comes because of Umaoya and the Broadlands as well. So when you look at 2023, the mini hydro 20, roof solar 100 again. So wind 25, the Mana extension will come, and then biomass 4, and the ground solar will be approximately 100. So that year will be about 254 and so on. So then we did the calculation for 24, 25, those are 24, 305 megawatts and 25, 340 and so on. But these numbers are not sufficient. These are already committed plants, renewable plants, which started some times ago and work is going on. This does not include this, what Marika said about 30,000 megawatt of tenders came. Those are not included here. So those are in the preliminary stage. So I think perhaps the Sustainable Energy Authority, Ministry and CEB have worked hard to get these projects on board. So these are just close the tenders and trying to prepare RFPs and to evaluate them and to invite the prizes and to evaluate. So that process has to go very fast. And then along with that, if transmission requirements are there, either to build it into the project itself, as Marika said, or else for CEB to construct these new transmission lines. So those things should start now itself. Those large scale projects should start, because now if you take the Mana transmission network can absorb easily another 200 megawatts other than what we commission 100. So that 200 does not need any transmission developments. Likewise, there are a lot of low hanging fruits which does not need any transmission development or distribution development. So we can easily say that we can absorb at least 500 of non-conventional, excluding large hydro, at least 500 megawatts of non-conventional renewable for the existing grid. Those are the low-hanging fruits. So we should target for the low-hanging fruits, because these are the least cost. This doesn't need any big 400 kVA transmission lines or whatever. So I think we can finish all the low-hanging fruits in next 3 years. So we should target and get the low-hanging fruits first for the next 3 years. Then even if you start a large transmission line now, it will take 3 to 4 years for the construction. So the large ones we can accommodate from 2024 or 5, 6, 7, 8. Then first 3 years for the low-hanging fruits and preparation for the large ones. Large one needs land and transmission lines and so many things. So those things will take some time. Then by that time, the transmission network should be ready. So if we can develop the transmission network in next 3 years, I think still it is sufficient to absorb large ones. So that we should have a proper plan. That is why I said all agencies should get together, integrate and prepare an integrated plan, which is not available at this particular moment of time. It is not there. So all have to get together and prepare. First attack the low-hanging fruits and get it right, and at the same time go for the planning of big ones and go for the planning of the transmission network. And then you will get big projects in 2025, 2026, 7, 8, 9. So likewise, we have to have a proper plan. And then each year we should know what we should do each year. So then we have to follow through that each year's commitment by various agencies. So that is why I said we have to have a secretariat so that interagency coordination can take place. And then each year targets we have to achieve. And then if we go like that with a proper nice plan, this ad hoc planning will not work. You have to have a proper nice integrated plan and agree and sign the plan by everybody. All stakeholders should sign the plan and the commitment of each and every year. And then if we go with the proper monitoring system with the presidential secretariat heading it, I think this will go. So a lot of things to be done.
Very clear, Mrs. Nevaratna. Very quickly, any plans for this rectification of the financial health? I know it will
Okay,
take
sorry,
hours to
I
respond,
forgot
but
it. Yeah.
very quickly.
Yeah, it's the situation is very bad now. If I elaborate now, if you take the last year, our average income per kilowatt hour is about 1650, whereas the last year expenditure was little less because we had the huge rainfall, 5,800 kilowatt hours of rainfall. So our cost was somewhere around 2150. But if you take the previous year, it was 23 and 1650. So there is about 6 rupee gap between the selling price and the cost of the kilowatt hour. So that is for last. Now we did a calculation for this year, and this year is going to be very bad because the coal prices, which were in the range of $80 per ton in the world markets, now have gone up to 240. So the Norachole prices will go up drastically, and the oil prices are going up. So there are so many other costs because the devaluation of rupee, if it is 240, 80% of the things are imported for CEB. So that those things will go up. So likewise, the impact on the power generation for this year is huge. So if you really work out the cost, my guess, our finance manager did that, it will be approximate unit cost for this particular year. This year is a very bad year. It will be around 29 rupees. So our income is only about 1650, 17. So there is a huge gap. Gap is increasing. So unless we try to do this gap minimize, this year CEB's bottom line will be enormous. It will be negative more than 100 billion, negative at least 130 billion negative. The bottom line of CEB for this particular year. So next year may be better. I don't know because this year is going to be a dry year because the last year it was very, very wet year, 5,800 of hydro. This year is going to be a dry year. We saw the indication. So we have to run a lot of thermal this year. So when you do the dispatching cost also, we did all these things. It will come to approximately 29 rupees when you go the kilowatt hour to the doorstep, whereas our income is 1650, 17 in that range. So how to bridge the gap? So I think everybody has to get together and to find a solution. There's no point making allegations against each other. I think Central Bank, Treasury, CEB, Ministry, LECO, PUCSL, and the general public and everybody has to get together and to find solution to make the CEB financially viable, because this will, as Marika said very clearly, this will affect the renewable program because bankers will not believe CEB unless CEB's bottom line is good. So we have to make this done. So it's a must, I think. So all parties will have to get together, sit on a desk seriously, leaving out differences and to work out some good things, because there is still certain cost can be reduced, yes, and the tariff can be fine-tuned. Because for a fact, that last tariff revision was in 2014, that was a reduction of 25%. So for the last 10 years, there was no change in the tariffs. And the rupee devaluation was almost 40% during that particular time. All costs gone up, but CEB tariff remains same. And also I will tell one more fact. We have 1.3 million customers in Sri Lanka where monthly electricity bill is less than 60 rupees. Then another 1.4 million customers in Sri Lanka, the monthly electricity bill is less than 225. So we have to look at all these things. I don't say that we should increase everything, no. But still, there is room for further improvement of or further fine-tuning of the tariff as well, because that is also a must. At the same time, the cost of generation, because this year, the fuel cost will be just sufficient to meet the income. Our income will be sufficient only to meet the fuel cost. Only the fuel cost, not the capacity charges, any other charges, transmission charges, distribution charges. Because the fuel cost this year is very high because of the high coal prices. So unless we get together, sit and do something on this, I think Central Bank can play a big role there to really identify these issues and to make the CEB and the sector viable.
Thank you, Mr. Seneviratna. I think, as you mentioned, the central bank always encourages that we should have a I think, clear mechanism to ensure the financial viability of SOBs. And also, I think your remarks suggest that I think if you are based on these fuels and also thermal type power generation, I think this issue could further aggravate. I think the solution would lie basically in the renewable energy sources. So picking from that end, Dr. Simbalapitiya, would you like to elaborate very briefly on the technical and commercial challenges that we are facing in terms of popularizing the renewable energy development?
Yes, once again, let me be brief so that you have enough time for direct questions if you are going to take them. Technical challenges. Now, we need to accept the fact that the grid is gradually becoming a service provider. Traditionally, it was flowing or it was conveying power from the producer to the customer. So the grid is, but now it is gradually becoming just like a highway network. There are many producers, millions of customers, and power could go in either direction. So I saw there are questions related to this aspect as well, as to why my solar PV cannot be connected. The problem could be that the distribution network is already congested. Of course, I don't need to, I don't plan to go into the technical details, but the network has to be strengthened, particularly in certain urban areas. Congestion has already caused problems, as we see with the data. So this problem has to be identified and analyzed and resolved. As I always say, all engineering problems have a solution. The only thing is we need to accept that there is a problem and what the solution is. And moreover, we have to say who will pay for the solution. So it's not a situation where LECO will pay and CEB will pay and CEB will subsidize, the government will subsidize for anything and everything. If we expect that kind of a situation, probably we are into a gridlock, particularly with regard to absorption of renewable energy to the distribution network. What I mean is largely solar rooftops. So we need to identify the issue and make investments. Another point that I would like to remind the general audience is that electricity is the only commodity that you have to produce exactly when the customer wants it. There is no other commodity. I mean commodities. Of course, things like a smile and a kind word cannot be stored. It has to be delivered at the same time you want to smile with somebody. But I'm talking about commodities. Electricity, it has to be produced exactly when the customer wants it. So therefore, if a resource is producing electricity not at the time when the customer wants it, then it has to be stored. Or it has to be stored indirectly in the form of pumped up water in a pump storage power plant. So these technical facts we have to keep in mind very well. Then also, our electricity network is still not up to the mark with regard to reliability. Now, customers 25 years ago, if there is a power failure, they would blame X, Y, and Z, and then just be with it. But now they are not willing to accept it, and particularly with the new IT, the manufacturing and all that, the requirement is for reliable power. And when we see from the data from both LECO and CEB, we see from the reliability data a lack of investment on reliability improvement. So I'm not blaming CEB or LECO, but when you cut down investment on maintenance and replacements of aging equipment, you have to postpone the network upgrades, then the end result is shown in a statistic called reliability or unreliability. Would you believe that a LECO customer and a CEB customer has almost 100 trippings a year on the average, and 100 hours of outage of electricity on the average, not counting load shedding? So therefore, these qualities of power supply should not be forgotten, given the fact that our distribution network that we have is a good distribution network, is a good transmission network. It was engineered over half a century, in fact, more than half a century, by people who specifically worked on that engineering part and the economics of it. So we have a grid and we should not compromise the quality of electricity supply as we go on. So I think that's about all that I would like to bring in terms of the technical issue. I'm sure you have other questions for others as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Simbrapitia. And I think from the audience, I can see some interesting questions, and most of them have been already answered in our discussion. Now, Mr. Marikar, now from your points, what I have gathered, basically, you are expecting certain financial incentives, required facilities from the various parties in terms of the government, in terms of the banking sector, etc., etc. And also, I remember you were talking about this LNG power also. Now, one of our viewers asked whether LNG is a kind of a sustainable solution because it would also lead to foreign currency outflow. Why don't we capitalize the same investment into renewable energy sources like solar, wind, etc., etc.? So would you like to combine those two and give a kind of a brief answer?
Okay. On this LNG point, actually is correct. LNG is also going to be imported fuel, so it will take out the foreign currencies, and so that is what this LNG is, a transitory fuel until we cannot gradually stop importation of the fuel or coal immediately, and it has to move into the cheaper fuel, and the better fuel is LNG. So it will go to a transitory fuel towards the zero emissions, and then gradually, maybe once we are comfortable and our system is designed to take enough renewable energies, maybe that can be phased out. So until that, it has to be gradually phased out. I think CEB's generation plan has very carefully thought about it. And as for my very budget rough calculation, CEB's oil bill is approximately $600 million, $600 to $700 million a year. I'm only talking the fossil oil bill. And we were talking about even if we add the renewable energies in this phase to get 70%, we need about almost similar $800 million of outflow of foreign currencies to support that. So, but this will come as an investment. That is the difference, right? The fuel will have to purchase from our own funds. The investment can come from foreign capitals. Therefore, there should be some balance. So it's a good question, but anyway, it should be phased out gradually, I would say. Then the other thing is, I rather say that I didn't hear what Mr. Rohan Saniratna said about the CEB's financial losses, estimated financial losses, and the difficulty is going to be, because that will definitely affect the IPP companies, and is something like we are expecting more delays in our payments. Having said that, it's very encouraging to see that CEB is trying to sort it, or the government is trying to sort it out, the land issue. Any big project, the land should be on a mortgageable conditions. No project finance can be done without the lands on the mortgageable. So we need a clear title. The worst is coming from CEB, that's fine. If they can sort out the bigger parks and the land comes at the clean title, it would help for the financing and to expedite the process. Because we also have a experience in one of the projects, the CEB wanted to support with the land, but there were acquisition or the land acquisition program, and it got delayed, and there were a few years of delay on the project commissioning, and so those kind of things happen because the compensations are based on the government valuations. And for the last 7 years, I recently saw we involved about 10 transmission lines to say almost every transmission lines there was a case or a court case. So every transmission line was delayed. So these things are fairly affecting the investors. And the other thing is maybe when we go for bigger projects like Pool Arena 100 megawatt, which need about $150 million or more, and the countries like Cambodia, where we are working on a solar project, they are paying in US dollars. I don't exactly say the same thing to be repeated, but maybe for the not for the local investors, the foreign investors might like to see these tariffs are pegged to the dollars or paid in dollars or pegged to the dollars, because otherwise Sri Lanka will lose competition. People the investors will go for countries like the exchange risk is less. So these are the few things, and some other things like there may be CEB comes out with always a very good power purchase agreement. That was one of the biggest advantage in Sri Lanka and also in the sector. Our CEB's power purchase agreements and the other implementation agreements with the government are fairly in good condition. There may be some adjustments needed to suit for international financing, to suit the international lenders, but that is the plus point already we have, and they are more like tested for many years. So those things we should capitalize. That's what I see. Like, there is still a little bit improvement, but opportunities are immense. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Marikar. I think we are left only with 5 minutes. Before we finish, I think I would like to combine some of these questions from the audience. And Mr. Rohan Senaratne, there's a question, any plan in grid interconnecting India? And also I would like to combine that question with if the government takes a decision to make consumer tariff cost reflective, has the CEB studied the consumption patterns, for example, load profiles of end users to allocate the cost to the customer? Any response on that?
Yeah, the first one is connecting with India. So this discussion has been going on for more or less, I think, 6-7 years. So there had been certain studies done, both India and Sri Lanka jointly, and there were certain technical pre-feasibilities were done, and then for last few years it was a lull, and then I think again it has surfaced and some work is going on. I think ADB Priyantha is also willing to, I think, give some more technical assistance to do the proper feasibility study. And I heard that there are less costly options now. Earlier it was a cable. Now I think there's a possibility of going overhead lines as well. So I think this to be properly studied and do the feasibility studies jointly by both the countries, because this will have a lot of advantages. Because if you have a lot of renewables, like in Mana, we have so much of wind, so we may be able to transport a lot of wind to India, because Sri Lankan grid always a small grid, so our capacities to absorb renewable energy is very limited. But Indian grid is 100 times larger as Sri Lanka. So certain renewable energy, I think perhaps we can export to India and so on. So I think this is an area we should give serious thought and to come out with some solid products like feasibility studies and some business models and so on. Because we talk, but not much outcome up to now. So I think this is a good area that we can look into, and there are a lot of advantages of this one. What was the second question, Anil?
Has the
about
CEB
the
studied?
tariff, no? About the tariff, load profiles, and cost reflective. Yes, we have all information. We have a tariff division, tariff branch in CEB, where we have engineers expert on designing tariff. We have all the information, all load profiles, and how it affects the customers, and all information is there. So there is no issue of sitting together and finalizing a tariff if there is a will to do that. For last 10-12 years, I saw that there was no will by the PUCSL and also the government to look at this positively and to increase. So if there is a will from PUCSL, it is their task. If there is a will from the PUCSL, CEB is there to give 100% support and all whatever data to come out with a reasonable tariff. Sometimes may not be able to bridge the gap totally because it's an enormous gap. So there has to be a subsidy coming from somewhere. But at least to look at it positively and to work out some reasonable tariff programs is important.
Thank you. Dr. Siambalapitiya, now maybe you can answer as an energy expert. Is it possible for firms or households to be 100% off the grid and run on the solar energy with rooftop solars? And also someone asked whether these solar panel contain toxic materials, which is harmful for human health.
The answer to the last question, I do not know. I think you will need to refer it to an expert on the toxicity. But the first question is whether it can be, it is possible to be totally independent of the grid. So if the question is as to whether it is technically possible, my answer is yes, it is technically possible to have adequate storage. And if you are willing to rely on your battery, and that will be your reliability indicator, and you can produce enough electricity from the area you have under your command, maybe your roof, your garden, ground mounted, roof mounted, no connection to the grid, LECO or CEB is not there, and it is possible that that a battery can do the job. So there are similar systems, and some of you may not be aware, the island of Eluaitiu, which is about a few kilometers west of Jaffna, is run by CEB as an entirely renewable energy island. This resource is wind and solar, and there's a battery bank, and of course which keeps the storage, and of course in the eventual situation of several days of renewable energy not being received, there is a diesel generator as well. I'm sure some of you may like to get onto a boat and visit the place and have a look as to how it is running and what are the simplicities and complexities. So in the same way, a small household can also be operated. But then if you want to be connected to the grid, the connection of grid means the grid provides the backup support. So that means there is a cost to the grid. Even from the simple task of attending to a customer requirement and answering a service call, there is capacity allocation for that customer on the grid at distribution, transmission, and generation level, if you still want to keep the grid on. So that fee has to be paid to the grid. So that's what I said. In the same way that other countries moved, Sri Lanka also need to move our pricing as well to a situation where the fixed costs are charged from the people who are connected to the grid and who want to remain connected to the grid, and the energy can be coming from any source that is available at that time, and it is the tradable commodity. So that's the direction we should go in, and I wish that in the upcoming electricity price restructuring, both the Public Utilities Commission and LECO and CEB and the government would look into this aspect, so that adequate amount of revenue is collected through fixed charges or demand charges, allowing customers to produce their electrical energy from whatever source they want. Of course, there has to be backup capacity that the utility has to keep in, because reliability is the responsibility of the electricity supplier. So I think with that, I will conclude my answer on the first question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Siambalapitiya. I think we are almost, past the time, but I think we have lots of questions given the interest of topic. Since Professor Priyantha Wijetunga is also with us, may I have the liberty, directing one question to you, Professor. Now, one of our viewers asked, what can Sri Lanka learn from neighboring countries in terms of this renewable energy? I'm sure you can write a thesis on this, but very briefly, would you like to elaborate on that matter as a last point, please? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, I just pick one example of what India did when it comes to solar parks, for instance. I mean, we are trying hard, for some time in Sri Lanka to set up these, renewable energy parks. If you can basically take out the risk of the investors by providing the required facilities, transmission facilities, land acquisition, and everything done, and provide all these things and ask the investors to come to those solar parks or wind parks or whatever you call them, and whatever type of renewable energy you're going to have them, that's what we can learn from India. India has done enormously well by having solar and mostly solar parks in India, and that has improved, that has brought in a lot of investments. Badla Solar Park is one good example where we have almost 2 gigawatts of solar. And I think it's time that wherever we have land, of course, land is a constraint in Sri Lanka, you can use that kind of examples to increase renewable energy inputs to the system.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor. I think I should thank all the panelists and Professor for your valuable thoughts. Before I hand over the forum to Kushan, let me highlight a few takeaways, key takeaways. I think we all have agreed that I think the renewable energy is a must going forward to address the climate issue as well as to have some sustainable growth. For that matter, I think we have to have some large amount of investments which cannot be done only by the government or by the private sector. There should be a very close coordination. Not only that, I think all stakeholders should come together, even the regulators, the banks, financial sector, international community. The most of these collaboration is required to have a kind of a situation to achieve the targets. I would like to highlight these 4 Ds mentioned by Professor Priyantha. Decreased demand, decarbonization, decentralization, and digitization. I think these 4 Ds would help achieving renewable energy targets for our country as well. I think if you are targeting 70% renewable energy by 2030, I think there should be a clear direction and also commitment and also dedication to achieve that target. And these 4 Ds as well as the energy policy principles as laid out by the ADB also will be helpful in achieving that target. I think with that note, let me conclude the panel discussion. It has been a very productive session. I'm sure our viewers have gained a lot in terms of understanding and also clearing some misperceptions. So thank you very much, Professor Priyantha and Dr. Simbalapitia, Mr. Rohan Seneviratne, Mr. Marikkar, Mr. Rohan Seneviratne. Thank you so much. Over to you, Kushan. It's your call now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anil Pereira, for that wonderful discussion, and also for all panelists who contributed for a very insightful panel discussion. And also we should thank the audience for the active engagement too. So we have come to the end of today's webinar, but before we wind up, let me express our gratitude from the end of CBS to Professor Wijetunga once again for that eye-opening lecture. And also we should be thankful for all the panel members, Mr. Lakshan Jayawardena, Mr. Rohan Seneviratne, Mr. M. Marikkar, Dr. Tilak Simbalapitia, and Dr. Anil Pereira, who moderated the session and concretized the facts that we discussed during the session. So I should express our gratitude to the senior management of Central Bank for the support extended in putting this together. And finally, thank you very much to all participants who tuned into this webinar today. And we will meet again soon with another interesting topic. That is the plan. So thank you once again. Good evening to all of you, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.